finally back in the sanctuary. Decided not to pick up on Philippians because it was a pretty big gap between sessions. And there's a holiday coming up this week. Anybody remember what that is?
Passover?
No. Starts with a P. St. Patrick's Day?
Oh, Patty Day. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I wanted to go over a little bit about St. Patrick's life in comparison to another person within our Bible, so we can stay biblically grounded, comparing their lives and what they went through, how God's seen them through it. Us Christians, I believe, have been robbed of our heritage, if you will. And again, it has nothing to do with our nationality or our skin tone, because we are connected by the blood of Christ and through a lot of diverse different people. And I like to look back and look at the history of the church and sit and look at the family members we have and see how God has brought them through. I mean, you can think about the New Testament where it talks about people are saying follow Paul as much as Paul follows Jesus, if you will. So it is good to have these superheroes in the faith, these people that you can sit there and look at their lives and say, God brought them through this. And you can see the mark of Christianity and of biblically grounded theology, if you will, in their lives. So I believe we've been robbed, or history has been robbed from us. We are not told about the saints of old. And again, this happens to be a Catholic saint, but I think it's a more broader statement than the Catholic Church would be comfortable with. I'll tell you that. Some of the people they kicked out of their church probably more saintly than most of their popes. But I deal with that confusion. I believe this is the same with St. Patrick's Day. I believe it is a day to remember the acts God did in one of our brothers' lives in the faith. This day in which we should think about the things that he's accomplished through the faith has honestly been made into nothing but a day of drunken debauchery, to be honest. In a comparison, it would be like if we decided to make Easter about gambling because the Roman soldiers gambled over Jesus' clothes. So we're clearly looking at the wrong viewpoint as a society. So today I want to tell you about actually two saints and parallels of their lives. First being that of Joseph. Think about Joseph being sold into Egypt. It's very similar to the life of St. Patrick. So these men both were sold into slavery. You know about Joseph in Genesis 37, 28. Then those passed by the Midianites, merchants, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit and sold Joseph to the Shimeonites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Joseph into Egypt. So this is very similar to Patrick. Patrick was kidnapped by pirates at a young age, about 16, sold into slavery to the land of Ireland. And there he actually worked in Ireland for 6 years as a slave. Both of these men served God despite what they found themselves in. Think about Joseph and how he stayed true to his God in slavery and even in prison. If only Patrick, though, was sent a vision, which is very similar to Joseph. If you think about Joseph had visions about what God wanted him to do. Patrick ended up walking like some 200 miles to a boat to escape. And I would say if only Joseph was so lucky because instead of escaping his slavery, he was thrown into prison to be removed from his slavery. We can think about this in Genesis 39 and 20. And Joseph's master took him and put him in prison and placed him where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in prison. These events may seem as different as can be, but these times were God's preparation for these two men. Again, these were times where they had to rely solely on God. Where Joseph was imprisoned and trusting in God. I mean, even God put Joseph into a position of authority amongst the prisoners. And that takes a lot of accountability, if you will, that God would place him in that position. But also, Patrick, when he went back to his homeland, that was when he went and studied for the ministry. So these were both times of God preparing these two men for what is about to come. I am chewing through time. Both of these men grew closer to God through these trials. Patrick again going to essentially which was seminary at the time, and Joseph grew closer, as shown in Genesis 39, 22 and 23. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in prison, and whosoever they did there, he was the doer of it. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made prosperous. Think about it, he was even prosperous yet again in prison. Here you can think about this was a terrible thing of Joseph being sold into slavery, but ultimately it worked unto his good now, didn't it? He learned to trust closer into God. It was God forming him into the man that would eventually save the nation, if you will. Save his own family. It took trials, and there will be trials in our own lives. These two stories, in the same way though, God used the slavery and the horrors of slavery of Joseph's story to save not only the land of Egypt, but also his homeland of Israel, and his family that were the ones who sold him into slavery itself. We see this through a number of passages, but I will kind of hopscotch through Genesis so we can get the backing. I don't want you to think it's just me making this up, so we'll quote more verses. Genesis 41:41. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Now again, he had to be in prison to be at the right time, to answer some dreams, to be called on eventually by Pharaoh, which the person in which he answered the dream, and he said, remind the Pharaoh that I'm still in prison. He forgot for like 2 years. Delayed by 2 years, when he should have called him up and said, oh, you restored the butler, if I remember right. Yeah. Yet again, at this time, he's out of prison. He has answered Pharaoh's dreams, and Pharaoh is now going to put him in preparation of a famine on the land, if I should explain. So he's put over the entire authority. There's only one person above him, that's the king. And again, the king can rest easily because, yet again, God is upon Joseph in his preparation for this. So, pretty interesting. Genesis 41, 48, and 49. And he gathered up all the food of the 7 years, which were in the land of Egypt, and laid it up, the food in the cities, and the food of the field, which was round about every city, and laid it up in the same. And Joseph gathered corn as the sand of the sea, which until he left innumerous, for it was without number. Genesis 41, 56 and 57. And the famine was over all the face of the earth. Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold unto the Egyptians. And the famine waxed sore in the land of Egypt, and all countries came unto Egypt to Joseph to buy corn, because that the famine was so sore upon the land. And eventually draws his brothers to come there and to buy. Genesis 42, 1 through 3. Now then, Joseph saw that there was corn in, Jacob, his father, saw that there was corn in Egypt. Jacob said unto his sons, Why do you look upon one another? And he said, Behold, I have heard that there is corn in Egypt. Get ye down there and buy for us their hence, that we may live and not die. And Joseph's 10 brothers went down to buy corn in Egypt. Likewise, Patrick was drawn back to the land that enslaved him. Ireland and the land of Ireland, and he led many unto salvation unto Christ. And again, he actually had a dream of an Irish man with letters asking them to come and teach them about Christianity. Ultimately, what can be the darkest parts of your lives, God can form into a ministry. Ultimately, this kind of concludes in Genesis 50, 19 and 21. And Joseph said unto them, Fear not, for I in the place of God, I in the place of God. But as for you, But as for you, ye thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to bring it to pass, as in this day, to save much people alive. Now therefore, fear ye not. I will nourish you and your little ones, and be comfort them, and speak kindly unto them. God can use all things unto his glory. This is his mercy. Catch that. And I think that this is something that definitely God does do for us. That he can bring the worst parts of our lives to a wonderful ministry to draw others unto the kingdom of God. He is preparing us for possibly more difficult times ahead, but yet again, you'll be prepared. And I know each and every one of you happens to have a ministry in your lives, regardless of, and again, if you may think that time has passed, God has raised you up to be examples unto others in this church, to minister and to guide them through the things in which you've endured in your own lives. But yet again, there's a comfort here, and I think what Joseph said is true. But as for you, you have thought evil against me. There's a time when we were in enmity with God. We wanted nothing to do with it. God wants to draw us to him, and he's going to make those times, yet again, bring them to good fulfillment. And it will come to pass. And here at the end he says, to save much people alive. Again, this is the Old Testament, and they're thinking about, yet again, just feeding their bellies. But now you have something that can feed and nourish the soul itself, in which we are seeing a sin-sick world destroying themselves trying to fulfill that God-shaped hole in their heart. And you keep trying to shove other puzzle pieces in there. You ever try to shove a puzzle piece that don't fit? All that cardboard begins to fray and to split apart, and it does a lot of damage. Likewise to the soul. You try to fill something that isn't God in that hole, and it's going to rip and tear. Yet again, God has prepared you, and I don't know what He's done in your lives to prepare you, to minister unto other people, to, as what did Joseph say here at the end? To save much people alive. Again, spiritually, we can say. And what does it go here? Now, therefore, fear ye not. There is a lot of fearing. We're scared. I'm in a predicament right now, and again, being stuck due to COVID. I will tell you guys, I've currently lost my employment. I can say I'm afraid right now, and I'm thankful for the stimulus check because it came just right where my check started ending. Then after that, tax season comes up, and I can see where God is protecting and leading and guiding me through this time where I cannot be employed. Well, I'm employed, just not financially stable with it. God has definitely called me to many different ministries, so I can't say I'm unemployed. But you can sit here. He says, "Fear not, I will nourish you." Now Joseph is saying he's been prepared, but he knows that God prepared him to do it, and it's to the glory of God. So God will nourish you and your little ones. That's a lot. And he comforted them and spake kindly to them. These are people that were at enmity with Joseph, sold him into slavery. We were at one point enmity with God and would have nothing to do with him. And he says, now I'll nourish you. I'll protect your children. I will comfort you and speak kindly to you. When there was times, I remember, where I didn't have comfortable words to speak about him. So we see these two men's lives. Again, I can't think of anything as terrible as slavery in my own life to compare. But these two men, Joseph and Patrick, sold into slavery and then eventually called to save the people in which treated them as a cattle, as unpaid servants. Can you imagine that level of love? Think about Christ, who again died for those who, for their sins, and the people who put him on the cross. Think about that level of sacrifice that these men were called up to through the example of Christ, and how we're eventually at this point where eventually, if that came to be, could we make that? And I'm sitting here and saying, I know I don't know that answer. But yet again, I know in Scripture multiple times God is questioning, to preparing us, growing the kingdom to, if we needed to, could we save even those that have enslaved us? Will we call down sin to those that will eventually persecute us even unto death? As it was said, to save much people alive. So ultimately, I think the verse that we can sum it up, you can kind of label it as a memory verse here, and we quote it a lot, and I don't think we quote it in the context. Genesis 50:20. But as for you, ye thought evil against me, but God meant it to good. We quote that verse all the time, but did we really think about it in context of an enslaved Joseph that is now at the opportunity where his family's lives is in his hand, and he could hold it against them. He could demand everything from them. Think about it. He could be like, well, firstborn, give me your birthright, and give me all your financial wealth. He didn't. He said, no, I will speak comfortably to these people that have treated me horrifically. Sold him to slavery, eventually gets in prison because of something he didn't even do. Eventually now, yet again, he is the second hand of the greatest governing body at the time. It's Egypt. And he says, essentially, what you've meant for evil, God has turned to my good. To bring it to pass as it is this day. So he's saying, all these terrible things that came to me was to eventually accomplish this, to save much people alive. I'm going to tell you, God has brought you through many things, has held your life in his hands to accomplish the same, to make you go out, to proclaim the gospel, and to save many people alive, to bring them to the kingdom. think that is what reminds me, or why I remember St. Patrick's Day so fondly, is it's a reminder of the story here in Genesis, and a reminder of that God will bring whatever evil unto good. I can think about that. I'm sitting here, I've been unemployed for a whole month. But yet again, checks only stop now. Why? Because God prepared me. Vacation they had to pay out. They had to pay out a bunch of PTO because God prepared that time. What have I been doing with that time? I've been preparing Bible studies. I have 9 books that all got to be done is edited, and they can go out the door. That is a lot that can be accomplished in that. So I know, and I can testify myself, that God is using a terrible time that people can look at to prepare things for the kingdom. And I know you have went through things that you can lead and guide and example and minister to those in this church. But again, this was kind of shorter. I will be playing a video about St. Patrick's Day to pad out some other time, but it's up to you. Thank you all.